Question 19. Is the 13th Amendment legal according to the U.S. Constitution, and did it end slavery? The approval of the 13th Amendment did not occur in accordance with the constitutionally mandated process, and consequently, many legal scholars question the amendment's legitimacy. The amendment was approved by a Civil War Congress, but before it could be included into the U.S. Constitution, ratification was required by 3/4 of the duly elected state legislatures. Therein lays the problem. That step was never completed. When the Civil War ended in 1865, the U.S. consisted of 35 states, 24 were Union, and 11 were formerly a part of the old Southern Confederacy. Congress therefore needed 27 states to ratify the 13th Amendment. Since 2 Union states, Kentucky and Delaware, rejected the 13th Amendment, Congress needed the remaining 22 Union states plus 5 Confederate states. At that time, the 11 Confederate states were in total political disarray in the aftermath of the Civil War. The Southern states had no duly elected federal or state representatives in office, and even if those officials had been in place, they would have refused to ratify the 13th Amendment, which was crafted to officially end slavery and free nearly 5 million blacks. How did the Northern Union respond to the disarray in the Southern states and secure the mandated number of elected state officials? The U.S. Congress used its legislative power to install Union military commanders in the needed 8 Southern states to function as judiciaries in the absence of duly elected state legislators. Congress authorized the Union military commanders to cast the needed yes votes. The military troops pulled out a few years later. Their yes votes on the 13th Amendment were generally accepted, but it appears that they were never recalculated in ratification by duly elected legislators in those Southern states. The second concern about legitimacy emanates from a parenthetical clause in the 13th Amendment. When the Civil War ended, plantations and farmlands were returned to the previous white owners, who again needed unpaid or cheap labor to work the land. White European immigrants were unwilling to migrate to the South and compete with black labor for low-wage jobs. The 13th Amendment provided a partial answer for the South's renewed need for unpaid or new forms of slave labor. It contained a clawback provision that allowed white society to re-enslave blacks. The 13th Amendment reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States." Beginning in the 1860s, following emancipation, every Southern state enacted an array of interlocking laws intended to criminalize people with black skin in general, and black men in particular, and to legalize black re-enslavement. It was totally understood that the new Jim Crow segregation laws and black code provisions were targeting blacks and would rarely, if ever, be enforced on whites. The parenthetical clause in the 13th Amendment was used to return whites to total political control and blacks to their former low-level position in society. Whites, as symbols of authority, could criminalize blacks by merely charging that a black violated the white code of etiquette. The whole code of etiquette was informal and included requirements that made it criminal for blacks to dispute a white person, count change in front of them, look down on them, or look a white person in the eye, speak to a white person with your hat on, step off of the sidewalk to let a white person pass, own a more valuable house, land, or automobile than a white person, call a white person a liar, be in the presence of a white woman in the absence of a white male, or to express familiarity with a white woman. The list of what was considered a criminal act, if violated, was endless. Perceived violations of the Southern Code of Etiquette could easily cost a black person his freedom or life. There were hundreds of thousands of instances in which a black person charged with having committed a crime or violating a code of etiquette was beaten, run out of town, or lynched. If a public authority simply said a black person was guilty of a crime, whether the crime was fabricated or not, that person would be imprisoned and used as free labor. Taking advantage of that impactful parenthetical clause, the Southern states and their local communities enacted the black codes and black peonage laws that instituted the system of Jim Crow segregation and subjected blacks to another 100 years of semi-slavery. Like codes of etiquette, the black codes criminalize blacks, making it a crime to be homeless, unemployed, not to have on their person a written contract to work for a white person, especially during planting and harvest times. Peonage laws allowed a person to be held in servitude or partial slavery so they could work off a debt or serve a penal sentence. A common charge was the failure to pay a debt to a white person or to be caught carrying a firearm or weapon. Once arrested and charged, the court system would typically follow up an arrest with no more than a kangaroo trial. In many instances, trials were denied altogether, but the end result was always the same. Blacks, especially men, were sentenced to long prison terms, sometimes for their entire lives. Incarcerated black persons were assigned into public road gangs. It was not unusual for prisons to loan out blacks to local businesses, farmers, and white households. The practice of creating a free pool of labor by incarcerating blacks for breaking frivolous laws continued from Reconstruction well into the 1960s. In the 21st century, private prisons are common and constitute a lucrative business in which thousands of corporations and businesses profit by using prisoners to replace paid employees. So, was the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution legitimate? Ask those black men who were re-enslaved and their families, and the scholars, who will always wonder to what extent they should draw attention to the improper ratification process of the U.S. Constitution.